to another edition of the Do Good to Lead Well webinar series and podcast series. My name is Craig Dowden, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you here today. Really excited about this conversation, and as always, love to provide some context for where this came from. In my role as an executive coach and keynote speaker, I have a lot of wonderful opportunities to speak with best-selling authors, top CEOs, global CEOs, like our guest today. And so what I wanted to do was open up that conversation to a broader community. And so we could have a really important discussion around leadership and positive leadership in particular, and how to make a positive difference, not just in our own lives, in the lives of the organizations we're a part of and the communities that we're involved in. And so I couldn't think of any better guest to join us today as part of that mission than Howard Behar. And so just to give you, I will not be able to do this justice, and I wish it was days long because there's so much to extract from it. I have my copy of, I have the hard copy of It's Not About the Coffee, and I have my ebook copy of The Magic Cup. So he is a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and top business CEO, global CEO. His career in business spans over 50 years, all in consumer-oriented businesses, covering several industries. He retired from Starbucks Coffee after 21 years, where he led both the domestic business as president of North America and was the founding president of Starbucks International. During his tenure, he participated in the growth of the company from 28 stores to over 15,000 stores spanning 5 continents. He served on the Starbucks board of directors for 12 years before retiring. He's currently a trustee for the Sherry and Les Biller Family Foundation and is on the advisory board of Anthos Capital. He formerly served as a board member for Starbucks, Gap, SureGuard, University of Washington Foundation, and ID Tech, just to name a few. He's committed to the development and education of future leaders and has been a longtime advocate of the servant leadership model, which I'm really excited to dive into. And on top of all of the extraordinary things he's accomplished as an executive, as I mentioned, he's a best-selling author and keynote speaker of It's Not About the Coffee and The Magic Cup. Welcome to the program, Howard.
Thank you, Craig. It's great to be here.
Well, it's awesome to meet you, and certainly I had lots of interest in terms of our conversation. And so when it came to writing both of your books, and they're just I could open almost any page here, and there's highlights. People who know me, I highlight. So what was it that was the core motivator in terms of you authoring these books?
Well, you're looking at a guy that barely got out of high school, so my English teacher would never have said that my name would have appeared on a book unless I'd written it there myself. I had 2 people that I worked with at Starbucks. One was the head of marketing for international, and another one was a consultant that worked with us. And they kept telling me I need to write a book. I used to have a wall filled with quotes, and they said, you got to write a book about all these quotes. And I kept a file that eventually got about 8 to 10 inches thick of just ideas and notes for the past 40 years. And finally I said, okay, let's write a book. And but you're the ones that have to write it, and that's how it got started. And then they both got busy, and I ended up getting somebody to help me write it. So I'd like to tell you that I was the sole author. I wasn't. The ideas are mine, but I had to have a lot of help.
Well, I think that's awesome. And did you mail a copy to your high school teacher and say, hey, look, I've written a book? So.
Unfortunately, she'd already passed away, but I could have.
Well, there's just so much in there and so much that I'd love to cover. And one of the core messages that you do cover, and in the book that I just mentioned, and it's in the preface to the paperback edition, you talk about leading in hard times, which certainly is where we are today. So what I'd love to start with, Howard, the question you open with, you said a critical reflection question is, are you being true to yourself and your values? And I love that that's a topic you continue to come back on in different ways. So can you share more about this and why it's so important, especially not just in day-to-day when we're leading through tough times?
Well, you know, it's the most important thing you can do, because you need to be you in any leadership position. We talk a lot about it today, being the authentic self, right? And that that is critical when you're building a team and you're working with a team, because the only way you can be your authentic self is if you build trust. And that means that you always have to tell the truth. And the truth has to be aligned with your values, who you are as a person, and everybody in the organization should understand who you are, what your values are, how those values inform the actions and the decisions you make in life and in work. And so it's particularly important in difficult times, because if you don't have trust in any time, it's hard to make any gains. But particularly in difficult times, people totally have to trust each other, and they particularly have to trust their leaders, that they're telling them the truth and that they have their best interests at heart. So it's really, that's where it comes from, is this idea that being yourself allows you to build trust, and building trust gets results.
Mm. Well, and I love that linkage that you make, and in particular around during difficult times, because as you say, without trust, where do you go? And it's so important because people are looking to you in terms of what decisions you're making and how they're making. And so one of the questions that I get asked routinely and talk about with executives and aspiring executives, so it's great that we're chatting, is that, so how do I figure out who I am? Sometimes it seems like, this question that, well, shouldn't we all know? And sometimes people struggle. So what advice would you have for people in terms of figuring out their values and who they are?
Well, the way I'll give them the way that I did it, and I went and got a list of 300 words that represented human values, and I started on that list, and I started checking the ones that didn't fit me, and putting a circle around the ones that I felt represented who either I was or who I wanted to be, because you're not always there. It's a journey. So over time, I got it down to 50. And then the goal was to get it down to 8 or 10. And once I got it down to 8 or 10, they were written down. I defined what they meant to me. It didn't mean that the other 50 weren't important, didn't play a role in my life, but these are the 8 to 10 core values. So my first core value is honesty. And I can't always tell you that I was honest in everything I did in my life, but over time that I made sure that I lived up to that value. And even when it cost me, I would live up to that value. And I have a quote on my office wall: "Only the truth sounds like the truth." And that quote has driven me. But you have to write them down, and you have to define what they mean to you. Because if I went around to your whole audience and I said, "Are you honest?" everybody'd probably say, "Yes, I'm honest." But when we dug a little deeper, and I might say, "Okay, what would you tell a white lie about?"
Right.
And right, we'd all have, we've all told white lies of some form or another, no matter how small or sometimes big. But you have to define what those values are, and they have to be written down, because if they're not written down, then they're just wishes, hopes, and dreams. And then I created a mission statement for myself. My mission statement goes like this: every day I want to nurture and inspire the human spirit, beginning with myself first and then for others. So that drives me in my life. And so those things have all been written down, and I carry them around with me no matter where I go, to always remind myself who I am, what I stand for, how I make decisions, and that builds trust.
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. Go ahead.
No, and what I love about what you're sharing, Howard, it's so powerful because, as you say, start off with the 300, winnow it down, and then you get to the 8 to 10. And
Yeah.
I think, and it's just so powerful around, well, then how do you live those values, and how you talk about defining that? So behaviorally, how will people know that we're honoring our values? How will we know that we're honoring our values? And also love the point around, well, and asking ourselves, the white lie question, or those uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
I think that is such powerful self-insight. Well, we've got a question already, and I'm not surprised. So Scott was wondering, have your values changed over time?
For the most part, they've stayed pretty constant. But I might have defined, probably where they have changed is how I've defined them. What I was willing to do. When I say the word, that one of my core values is give trust before you get trust. I had to practice that and learn that and decide that that's what it was going to be. And because a lot of people don't give trust, don't trust others until others trust them. And I think it's the opposite way. And I had to learn that skill over time, that I was willing to take that risk and trust others even before, that I just gave it before I trusted them.
Mm. Well, I think that's such a great point around, leading by example. Well, if I want you to trust me, I have to trust you first.
Yeah.
Um, and have another question from Alan, who's wondering. Sometimes I struggle in terms of love, that your first value is honesty, and sometimes Alan struggles with speaking up and speaking the truth. So any advice around, so how do you go about that? Because the fear of the consequences loom large, it sounds like.
Well, if you say that honesty is your most important value, then you have to live to honesty. And that means there are going to be times when you're uncomfortable. There's going to be times when you're taking a risk. I used to tell people all the time, you got to be willing to bet your job every day. You can't live a life of fear. You can't live a life that you're going to lose your job if you tell your boss the truth. That's not a place you want to work. And so, yeah, absolutely. We all have that. We all have those fears. I joke about this all the time, but my wife comes home with 3 new dresses on. She wants to model them for me. And then she asks the question, do any of these dresses make my butt look big? Let me tell you, in my early days of my marriage, I would say, no, honey, they don't. None. Now, I may have thought one did, but now, if I don't like it, I tell her, because I've learned that's what she really wants. And sometimes she doesn't like the answer, but she always knows she's going to get the truth from me.
Right. That's no, that's amazing. And I really like the idea around, hey, I have to be prepared to risk my job every day to speak up, to speak my truth and let people know what's going on. Tara loved the process, so thanks you for sharing the process, really valuable, and was wondering, are you able to share a couple of more of your values? Really interested in what's further down the list.
Sure. Love of self and others. Give trust before you get trust. I call it caring like you really mean it. That means that you care even when it costs you.
Mm,
Uh, 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 the other one is integrity,
wow. Yes.
right? And so it's all of those go to make up Howard. And I don't have it with me right now, but I have a sheet that has, I call a picture of Howard in 50 words or less. And I carry it around with me. Starts with my mission statement, my core values, and then what I call my 6 Ps, which are how I live my life.
What an awesome, and again, this is why I was so excited to speak with you, and the thoughtfulness that you have around. And the other piece that I wanted to acknowledge, and this just came in a comment as well, is around love. Like, I think right out of the gate, right, the top two, the first one you lead with is honesty, and then right after that is love. And so some people sometimes get a little squeamish around, well, love and emotion, right, within a workplace, within a work environment. So talk to us about, like, what that means and why it's so important, and what benefits you've seen that it brings to the table when we do create a culture of love and respect.
Well, it's not the same love that you have children, that you love those children. This is a love because these people are human beings, and because they're human beings, they're worthy of love, and love and respect. And so love, yeah, people are uncomfortable with love in the workplace, but loving people, right, enables you to care about them more, because you realize that they are human being and they're worthy of that love because they are a human being, and you have to express that love. And the way I think about expressing that love is how you treat them when there's a conflict.
Right.
Right? That you're not in a blame game, you're not in abuse, you're not in a yelling, screaming mode, you're in a love mode. That you realize that these are human beings, they're worthy of love, and they're worthy of being treated with respect. One thing I like to say to everybody, you go out and you hire people and you bring them into your organization, and you love them, you're excited about them coming in, we love what they're going to contribute. And then you find out that they don't live up to it and they have to move on. but you got to love them as much going out the door as you loved them coming in the door.
Right. Mm.
And so I know that some people are uncomfortable with that word, yeah, but if you think about it in the context of humanity,
Yeah.
then it kind of settles down that the way we move the world forward is by loving each other, by trusting each other, treating each other with respect, caring about it.
Absolutely. And there's so much in there. And one thing that I want to acknowledge, because I think, and this is a point that's so powerful and so important, and I would say, especially in today's, age, is that I've had the amazing good fortune as well to speak with Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes and Ford Motor Company. And within his working together, sorry?
He's one of my favorite people.
I'm not surprised because, well, as you'll know, right, and this is why I want to make that point. You are at the epitome. You are globally recognized as a business and leadership icon. And here we are today talking about the importance of love and and talking about Alan and the working together management system. His first principle is people first, love them up. And I think it's so inspiring for me for our conversation right now and linking it with others that this just isn't, well, this is a good idea. You have achieved more than anyone could possibly. Just in the bio, the short bio that I mentioned at the beginning, look at how, and that's what I am so excited about, is that look at how that philosophy of love, and as you describe it, Howard, respecting each other's humanity and who we are and what we're about and what's important to us, how that drives just exceptional achievement when we create an environment in which that flourishes.
I'll give you a great example. Okay, we all know Microsoft. Well, Microsoft was led by two really hard-nosed guys, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. And they were yeller screamers. And they could be abusive to their people. If they thought their idea wasn't right, they'd call them stupid. So, and for a long time that worked. The highly competitive environment, but then it didn't work. And people were leaving because they didn't want to be treated like that. And eventually, both Ballmer and Gates are gone for different reasons. And a guy that steps in is who is now the CEO, was actually at Microsoft, and he changed turned the whole thing on its head. And he said the single most important skill any leader has to have at Microsoft is empathy.
Right. Wow.
Which goes and totally changed the business. We went from a stock that was depressed, wasn't going anywhere, to a high-flying company again that people want to work at. And it works. Or Uber. The guy that ran Uber wasn't exactly a nice guy that started Uber. Was he smart? Yeah. We're not talking here about, yeah, he was smart. He wasn't emotionally smart. He didn't understand people and he abused people, and eventually he was gone. And Uber struggled ever since.
No, you're so right, and I love that emphasis on building that culture and respecting each other's humanity. I think that's so important. We've got another question and comments coming in already about how just loving your answers and your perspective, Howard. Emmanuel was wondering, have you ever felt discouraged, in terms of either someone's reaction or dismissing the idea of creating a more positive environment? And so any advice around how to keep going and how to reframe and keep pushing through if people resist that idea of love and respect in the workplace?
Well, you just keep practicing it, right? People model what you do, not what you say. And you just keep practicing it. And then if every organization has a culture. The question every leader has to ask is it the culture they want? And how do they know? And so if you want a culture of love, you have to practice love. And then you have to say, this is an expectation here. And you have to define what it means. It's how we treat each other that expresses love. Do we abuse each other? Do we put each other down, or do we build each other up? Do we help each other? Do we assist each other? Do we have to take the credit, or can we always give the credit? And so it's it's the little things that matter, and they build over time. And so, yeah, I've been in organizations that weren't like this. Absolutely. And I've worked with people that weren't like that. I used to report to a guy that every morning he would come in and he would say to me, "Hiya, dummy, how you doing?" Well, after a while, it didn't sit well with me. This is where I got my job. He came in one day and he did that, and he was about 6'4", and I'm about 5'10", so he was towering above me. And I just looked at him and I said, "Don't you ever, whatever, I won't say the word, say that to me again." 3 weeks later, I was fired, but that was okay.
Right. Well, back to honesty and and holding on to our values. And I know, and that's something again that I find is so wonderful about what you share, right? When things aren't aligned with our values, because you share the story as well. Hey, if you leave a job because it's not aligned with your values, you're not a quitter. This isn't bad. This is
No,
about honoring who you are and tapping into that. I think that's such a powerful way to frame that.
yeah.
And so you touched on this. There's so many great quotes throughout the books. This is one that I just absolutely loved. And you said, "I know from firsthand experience that there's a large gap between the wisdom of knowing what's right and the wisdom to do what's right." That's almost an hour-long conversation for me. Like, I just thought that was absolute genius. Can you talk about that and what creates that gap between knowing what to do and actually then doing it?
Fear,
Fear.
fear, fear of rejection,
Right.
fear of making a mistake, um, uh, fear of failure.
Right.
That's the gap. And you have to overcome that fear. I have another quote that I love that addresses kind of the same thing. Think like a person of action, act like a person of thought. And, I used to struggle with that one, but I still struggle sometimes with it. But, there's a point in time where you have to act.
Mm,
You have to overcome the fear and you have to move forward. And
mm,
sometimes you make a mistake and you have to correct. Today in today's world, young people call it pivoting. We didn't call it pivoting there in my time. We call it making a mistake and having to change course. But
right.
but it's it's fear that keeps us.
And I've got a question, and that's such a great point. And Allison jumped in and love that you highlighted that and the impact of and the negative impacts of fear. What are the ways that what are things leaders can do to build an environment where they really minimize fear? So what can we do to just really lower the temperature on that?
Well, it's, we hire great people and we bring them into the organization. I call it, and we should let the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. Well, in that process, somebody's going to choose the wrong broom. So it's how you act in that time frame. No human beings gives you what you expect. We're human. We never are perfect. We're never always in alignment, and you have to have lots of forgiveness in your heart.
Mm,
You don't play the blame game. You play the learning game. What did we learn? Not you're at fault, but what did you learn?
right.
And we support our people. That doesn't mean if somebody makes the same error 4 times in a row that you don't hold them accountable. It's not my point. But it's how you hold them accountable.
Mm,
Are you a yelling screamer? Do you treat them with love, respect, and dignity, even though they screwed up, or do you blame them and create fear? And
mm,
and so if you treat them well, you and care about them, and don't get in the blame game, right? Then that takes care of itself.
mm. Well, and I love that, Howard, in terms of just that piece around accountability and caring for, loving
Yeah,
for people, respecting them. They
yeah,
aren't competitive. They are quite cooperative. So we can, and sometimes, and it's interesting, I find people think, oh, well, if I'm nice, I can hold people accountable and be nice. What really resonates with what you're saying is that no, these two things go together. And in fact, they are necessary because if you really go after someone, as you say, you're a yeller and you're a screamer, you belittle them, how are you going to get the best out of them?
well, it's just like these same principles, by the way, apply at home. These are
Right.
not work principles; these are life principles. So you go home and your spouse has made a mistake. Does it work to yell and scream at them? Does that build on your relationship? Right? It doesn't. If you're constantly in the blame game, then it doesn't work. And I know that firsthand, right?
Right.
I do that. Yeah, and I continue to screw up sometimes, but what works is love and forgiveness, and oh, you dented the car, no problem, we can get it fixed. You
Right.
know.
Well, and one of the other themes that I find as I read through your books is that what I love is that because in a lot of cases people discuss kind of okay within the realm of leadership. So as you say, so let's build a loving culture for our people as leaders, and then talk about gratitude, and you discuss a lot around that, and everyone needs recognition. What I really find is awesome and impactful in terms of how you look at things, Howard, is that then you include self in that. It's always self and other. So can
Right.
you share with me, because I think that's just a brilliant insight. You talk self-love, you talk about self-gratitude. Where did that appreciation come from, and how do you see that manifesting in terms of just how we can be at our best and support others to be at theirs?
It's one of the most difficult things to do in your life is to love yourself unconditionally. And I'm not going to sit in front of you or your audience and tell you that I've conquered it. I haven't. But I work at it. I have a quote in my bathroom, and it says, "Love yourself unconditionally," or "I love myself unconditionally." And I figure if I can love myself unconditionally sitting on the toilet, I ought to be able to do it anywhere. And so, but that's a journey. That's constant reinforcement. I have another one that I try to live by. I am enough. I have enough. I do enough.
Mm,
These both of them are affirmations, and that I've had for a long time. You'd say, well, shouldn't you be able to get over those affirmations and go on to other ones? No, not these two. These
okay.
are they're endless. You know.
Well, and that's another piece I really appreciate is that it's a lifelong process. It's about
Yeah.
being open. It's about expressing curiosity with ourselves and with other people. I think that's just so absolutely invaluable in terms of our own development. So I've got another question from David, and who was wondering what has been a big shift in your leadership style throughout your career? What's one thing that where you pivoted and what led to that pivot?
Um, Probably the difficulty in my early years of thinking that I couldn't hold people accountable. That
Interesting take.
if you cared about people, that you couldn't hold them accountable. But just like you said before, it's not either or. You can care about people and hold them accountable. Servant leadership is much about performance as it is about serving people. And so it's that journey, getting comfortable with speaking the truth, holding people accountable in serious conversations, but showing them that you loved them and you respected them.
Mm. Well, absolutely fantastic. And so, as a Canadian, and there are Starbucks all across our great country, I loved your story around. So, just that introducing Starbucks into the Canadian market, and in particular, kind of giving that autonomy, if you will, or that collaboration. Can you share a little bit about that story? Because I just think it's such because we've had examples of global businesses trying to break in and they haven't been successful, and Starbucks definitely has been. Can you share a little bit about that, and also what enabled you to take that approach? I just think it's such a really awesome perspective.
Well, I mean, people are people no matter where you go. We may have different cultures. We may say about and about, differently, but or garage and whatever. Oops, excuse me for 1 second. Sorry,
Yeah,
I've got somebody.
no problem. This is what happens in real time. It's a technical difficulty, shall we say. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in. All loving all the comments thus far, so thank you. Please keep them going.
Sorry about that. The guy with
Not a
the
problem.
The guy with the gas blower showed up at a time that I didn't expect him. So, so what were we talking about? Sorry,
No, the Canadian expansion, and as you were saying, people are
well,
people wherever they are, and
I mean, we came Canada early on in Starbucks history. It actually, Howard had opened up a store in Vancouver before I even got to the company at a little place called Cbus and in Vancouver. And it was the ferry dock. And so, and what's interesting, Seattle is a Pacific Rim city. Vancouver is a Pacific Rim city. We had a lot in common with the two cities, and it kind of made it easier on us. It was more difficult going east for us, but over time we understood. And when I retired once, and I came out of retirement, and at that time, Canada, the geographic regions of Canada were reporting the same geographic regions in the United States. And I said, we can't do that. Canada is its own country. It needs to be run by Canadians in Canada. And so I made that change, and I used the Martin Luther King's quote: "Free, free, free at last." Right? Canada, you're free at last. Go for it. And they did, and it's incredible the job that they did by understanding there are differences, and people have to have pride in what they do. And Canada's been an amazing success story for Starbucks, but we treated people the same wherever we went, with respect and dignity. It didn't make any difference what the culture was. You always get respected at Starbucks.
And what this is, I want to highlight this as so strongly, because what I find is remarkable, because if you look at other examples or other individuals who would have that opportunity, where they'd say, well, why would I give up control or power or this or that, right? Like and I love that what you're talking about is, no, this is the right thing to do for the people in our organization. And this will drive much higher engagement and will deliver much better results for all of us. So what enabled you to let that go and make that larger than self decision? I just think it's because for some people they say, oh, well, I don't want to let, right? I don't want to let control or that power go. So what enabled you to be able to recognize that?
Well, when I first came to Starbucks, I said to everybody should get to vote in their own area of expertise. People didn't understand that, so I changed it to the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. So that's exactly the same thing in Canada. Who knows better about how to operate in Canada than Canadians? Nobody does. So it's in your self-interest to get out of the way. You give them the resources. You give them what are the expectations, what are the greater purpose of the organization. Give them, and give them help when they ask for it, but get out of the way. You hold them accountable. It didn't mean you didn't hold them accountable for their commitments, but you let them get out of the way. You get out of the way, and that works. And I've seen it time after time after time after time. I'm not a kid, I'm almost 78 years old here, and I've made lots of mistakes in my life and my leadership career. But one thing I've learned is when you let the person who sweeps the floor choose the broom, they usually, if they don't like the broom that you've given them, they'll go find a better broom, and they'll make it even better. And that's what happened in Canada. It happens everywhere.
I think that's such a wonderful reminder and a powerful example about what happens when we let go. And as you say, I love that. There's so many great quotes. The person who sweeps the floor chooses the broom. I think that's fantastic. I have another question from Yaniv, who was wondering, so because you accomplished so much through your career with Starbucks, and so when you started, what was your vision when you initially started with them? And then what was the one thing, if you can identify it, that you really kind of drove into the organization that fueled that success that you experienced? So would love to hear those things.
From almost the day that I got there, for some reason, I recognized that we weren't in the coffee business. We were in the people business. And I coined this phrase that we weren't in the coffee business serving people, but we were in the people business serving coffee. Sounds like a small play on words, but it became critically important. They still talk about it today. And that's what I drove. I just believed it with all my heart. Every entrepreneurial organization thinks they're in the business of whatever product or service they provide. but they're not. They're in the people business. And the product or service is it important? Yeah, it's got to be good, but it's really secondary to people. And so that's what I drove inside of Starbucks. So if you ask me what I left behind, it was that. And I used to say to people in the organization, I said, we need to president-proof this organization.
Right.
And, and that's what we tried to do. And were we successful at it all the time? No. But, help your people grow. Here's the equation. Grow the people grow the organization grows the business.
Love
So
it.
that's simple. It's always about the people. I don't care what you think it's about the people.
Right. Well, and this is such a beautiful segue to another question I wanted to discuss with you, Howard, is around, you say the most powerful question that you can ask someone is, why are you here?
Yes.
Can you talk about that? And for some, I know, working with different executives and founders and co-founders, and as you say, business leaders and entrepreneurs, they may struggle and or not answer that question. So can you unpack that for us, and discuss why it's so important and how we can figure that out?
Well, that's the most important question, is why are you here and why are you doing what you're doing, right? What is your greater purpose? And when I was interviewing people, that was one of the questions I would ask, is why are you sitting here in this office? And I didn't care so much what the answer was. I wanted to feel like they were being truthful and they were authentic with me. If somebody came, because Starbucks is the greatest company in the world, I'd always say, well, how do you know that? Why do you believe that? And, you always would dig deeper. It's never a yes or no question. So it's that why is the element. Why are you doing what you're doing? Because something has to get you up in the morning.
Right. Well, and you talk about, and again, it links back to the love around the connectivity between emotions and goals. And so,
Right.
can you unpack that a little bit as well, in terms of how the best goals are those that are the most emotional, if you will?
Well, let me explain it to you this way. I have what I call my 6 P's. It's how I live my life. The first P is purpose. Everything I do in my life has to have a purpose greater than myself. It has to be about serving others, because I think that's the only reason any of us are put on this earth, is helping others, whoever it is, with your family, with your, in your workplace, whatever it happens to be. The second P is passion. If you have a purpose greater than yourself, then you darn well better be passionate about it. Your emotions better be there. Everything, all your energy should be driving towards that, towards the achievement of that greater purpose. If you get those two aligned, it's amazing what you can accomplish, and it's amazing what happens in organizations. If people in the organization understand what the greater purpose of the organization is, and you can get them to put all their energy, their emotion, their passion towards achieving it, it's incredible what happens.
Well, and you mentioned that you're such a passionate advocate for servant leadership. So can you share with us your journey towards servant leadership, and what that means to you, and then and what got you interested in that initially, in terms of its impact?
In my early years as a leader, I had this innate feeling. Sorry.
No, yeah, that's real life that happens.
Sorry. Yeah, well, I know. I want to be able to talk. So he's liable to come into my living room and blow the living room. So anyway, remind me again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, that's I was talking about your journey to servant leadership and what it means to you and why it's so important.
Yeah. So when I was in my early 20s, I had an unconscious belief in serving people. It was family of origin stuff, and I didn't understand it. I was just doing it. I was an unconscious competent. I was confident at doing it, but I didn't know what I was doing. And so somebody gave me this little pamphlet by Robert Greenleaf, who coined the term servant leadership. And I read that little pamphlet and the aha moment came. Oh, this is what I believe in. This is the language I want to use, and this is why I believe it. And so from that day forward, I began a journey of learning all about servant leadership and understanding what it meant and how it worked and how it didn't work. And my goal was to be a conscious competent. In other words, that I understood what it was about and I could teach it. And servant leadership at its core is this understanding that leaders are not there to be served, but leaders are there to serve. And so when you get that right, it's, again, the results are incredible. And lots of leaders think that they're there to be served, but they're not. They're not. And they're there to serve. And you bring somebody in the organization, and if you help them get what they want out of their life, if you help them grow as individuals, grow as professionals, then they'll help you.
Right.
They'll help. And that's the basic context of servant leadership. And everybody thinks that servant leadership is mushy, it's soft. It's not. It's about performance. It's just how you get that performance, not on the backs of people, but with people.
And I'm so glad you made that point, because, and back to the either or from before, we do this or do that. And I really appreciate, Howard, that throughout everything that you write about and speak about and how you live and how you lead, it's about, well, it's how you go about doing that. And you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. It's being more thoughtful, being more intentional, bringing more humanity to our day-to-day and respect. I think that's just fantastic. I've got another question from Justin, who was wondering, what do you think are the key qualities that leaders need to have to be successful today?
Number one, empathy. They need to be humble. They need to be authentic. They need to be vulnerable. They need to have high expectations. They need to be able to communicate effectively the greater purpose of the organization and the values of the organization. And they need to be able to hold people accountable in a loving way.
Awesome. That's a mic drop answer right there. Really appreciate that. And got another question from Adam, who's really enjoyed that list, and then said, I have high expectations and big dreams for what I want to accomplish. And sometimes I feel a little the fear, the F word that you mentioned earlier. And so how do you, how any advice for how I can stay true to that and not lose sight of my big expectations?
Write down what your goals are. Have a plan. If you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. Write down your values, have a personal mission statement, have a plan. And that includes your values, your personal mission statement, and how you want to live your life. And then live to that. And I always believe in using affirmations to help you drive yourself. And two of the affirmations I told you before, I love myself unconditionally, and I am enough, I have enough, I do enough. And other affirmations, always use affirmations that are in the completed form, not someday I will, but I am. And, look, everybody has fear. I've dealt with it myself. I'm the original anxiety holder. I have anxious. I'm 78 years old. I got nothing to be anxious about. I'm still anxious, and it's just part of life. And we kind of we drive through it and we hold ourselves accountable and then get support. You don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. It's leaders think they have to have all the answers. They don't have to have any answers. They have to have great people that can give them the answers. I never saw myself as the answer guy, right? As wasn't who I was. Howard Schultz was I thought much more creative guy than I was. I'm the alchemist. Right. I'm the guy that went out and asked people what they thought. I'd take those disparate ideas, put them together, and the solution came. But they weren't my solutions. They were the people's. And so, you don't have to have all the answers. You can ask others. You can ask your board, your friends, the people you work with, the people that report to you. And it's amazing what will happen.
Mm.
Because you'll get rid of that fear that you have to have every answer.
Well, and I love that you in the answer to what qualities do we need, that you started with empathy, and then and then immediately afterwards you said humility, and I love everything that you're talking about in terms of how asking for advice, asking for a help, being open, just connecting with great people around you, and then bringing all of that, as you say, in The Alchemist, and bring all of that information together. I just think it's such a, and especially in a world that's moving so fast with such rapid change and things we've never encountered before, how important those qualities are. I think it's just absolutely bang on. What's Sam was wondering, what's the best piece of leadership advice you've ever received, and what's the worst piece of leadership advice?
The best piece of leadership advice wasn't advice. It was an interaction I had with another human being, and I was a fairly young leader. I was about 30 years old, and a young woman that reported to me came into my office, and she sat down across the desk and she started crying. And I got out of my chair, I grabbed the Kleenex, I went around, I put my arm around her, and I said, "Don't worry, it'll be okay." She about ripped my head off because she wasn't sad, she was mad. And her tears were of anger, not of sadness. And I misjudged. And I learned from that day forward, never assume.
Wow.
Never assume. Always ask the question, what's going on? What can I do to help you? What are you feeling right now?
Mm.
And I have never forgot that as long as I've lived.
Wow.
I never assumed what somebody was feeling or thinking. I always asked. And so that was not, didn't come as a form of advice. It came as an interaction, but it was great advice, you know? Yeah. The worst piece of advice, single worst piece of advice. Well, it was more modeling than it was advice.
Okay. Right.
It was from the guy that I reported to that his name was Erwin Greenwald, and the guy that came in, and he always was putting people down. And I watched what it did to people. And from that day forward, I said, I'm only going to put people up. As Spencer Johnson or Ken Blanchard says, catch people doing the right things right.
Right.
And now I'm a manager.
And what are some of your favorite leadership practices, things that you've embedded into your leadership journey and daily practice that you find have, and I love that earlier that you mentioned, Howard, that the small things, they really matter. So what are some of the small things that you have done and you continue to do that just provide exceptional results?
You'll be surprised at this, I think, probably. If you're walking down the hallway in your office, don't walk by another person without not looking up and saying hello. How are you? When you get on the elevator in the morning, if you have an elevator in your office building and it's filled with all people, even people that work at different companies, say good morning. How you doing today? Isn't it a beautiful day out? You know, build that kind of energy in your life. Build it within your company. Don't ignore anybody. The other thing is, another small thing, it took me a lot of time, was I sent company birthday and anniversary cards to everybody in the company up until we had about 10,000 people. Hand signed. They weren't, the happy birthday was printed out, but then I would hand sign, and if I knew them, I'd write a note about something. And I sent, up until we had about 10,000 people, I sent them out. And then other people took it over. But it's amazing. I've been retired for 12 years, and it's amazing how many people still tell me about those.
Right. Wow.
You know how many people never even get a birthday card?
Right. Yeah.
Or nobody ever says thank you for being here this year.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
Things that make people human. Make them feel like they matter.
No, absolutely. Well, and have another question from Scott, who's wondering, so what are some of the best things I can do to develop as a leader? so that I can take my leadership to the next level and have the positive impact that you've been talking about today.
Well, I'll tell you what worked for me. I read leadership books,
Mm.
get my hands on, and not all things that I agree with, but you
Right.
know, Ken Blanchard stuff, Spencer Johnson stuff, uh, 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 Peter, brain just went dead. I forget. He was from
Oh,
UCLA.
Drucker.
Drucker, Peter Drucker. Get your hands on Peter Drucker's book. Good to Great, Built to Last by Jim Collins. Um, uh, One of my favorite books has been out of print for a long time. Is called um, um, Love and Profit
Ah.
by James Autry.
Mm.
I mean, there's an endless supply. And read biographies, autobiographies of leaders. I mean, you're going to find leaders that you disagree with, but read everything you can. You know, Doris Goodwin's book on Lincoln and his team. That was a fantastic book on it was, I think, Band of Competitors, something like that. But how
Yeah.
Lincoln put together all these people that he competed with and brought them into his cabinet and how he made that work. I mean, so read.
Well, and it's such a fantastic answer, and what I really appreciate is that in spite of all the extraordinary things that you accomplish and your team at Starbucks accomplished, not just within the United States, the global expansion and everything else, that is a key, right? Keep reading, keep being curious, keep learning. I think it's so wonderful that you reinforce that message.
And I still do it today. I'm reading Ulysses S. Grant autobiography, and it's so interesting to listen to him, right? And the struggles that he had with his life and where he came from, and all those things. And it's the only person I'm leading now is me, which, by the way, I'm the most difficult person I've ever had to lead in my whole life, and but constantly be a student.
Well, this time has flown by. We're almost at time, and so just wanted to express my profound appreciation, Howard, for and it was interesting reading the forwards to the books and hearing what people shared about you and how authentic you are, honest you are, humble. I mean, this has come across so powerfully during our conversation, and just the passion that you have for not just leadership, positive leadership, and for a human centered and servant approach. And it's just been an absolute privilege and honor. Any final words before we close our conversation today and where people can find more about you? I would, again, cannot recommend enough checking out the book. As you can tell, so many great quotes and insights. Any final words?
Yeah, well, let me give everybody my cell phone number and my email address. My cell phone number is 206-972-7776, and my email address is hb, those are my initials, Howard Behar, hb@howardbehar.com. And if anybody has a question or wants to talk, if they just want to complain about their boss, I'm happy to listen. It may take me a little while to get back to you, but I always get back.
That's I can't even what an amazing gift to everybody today, and thank you so much. I've just gotten a ton of positive comments, Howard, and really appreciate the time that you shared and your insights and your passion. This has just been a privilege for me, and to everyone who joined in. Thank you so much for your time, and now you know how to contact Howard. So, looking forward to continuing that conversation. So, thanks so much. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.